Okay, here we go to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have a really great review for you from the brand SUF or SUF Helsinki. SUF standing for, I'm going to try my best here, Sharapaneva urine fabric. And I'm sure I messed that up, but I also know that the kind folks of YouTube comments will absolutely jump in to correct me. So have at it, guys. Get in the comments and let me know. Sharpaneva. Why did I even try? All right. So they were founded in 2003 alongside Sharpaneva watches. So basically, the SUF range focuses on daily wearable timepieces versus the more bold looks associated with the other lines. Now, this particular type of watch, I'd consider it a field watch, a classic field watch at that. Some common characteristics and design language. When you're looking for something kind of within this space, of course, you're going to look for modest sizing, those Arabic numerals. Normally, you get some type of either 12 or 24-hour scale on there in either kind of a black or cream dial aesthetic. So this is a bit more distilled, and I think they changed the the recipe a little bit, but at the same time they add to it with these. Oh my goodness, the level of execution on this for a field watch is just pretty mind blowing. This is their black licorice dial. There's another word that they use for black licorice, but I'm sure I'm not going to pronounce that right, so I will just go with the translation. This is the SUF Helsinki 180 Alpha, and it's a 50-piece limited edition, and it's essentially their take on kind of a stripped down minimal field watch. And you can get it now from Belmont Watches for $2,675. This is a sold out piece if you were to try to go directly to SUF, but they do have some items I think regularly kind of in stock. They do very, very small batch. I've seen this brand all over Instagram, and then they've really caught my eye. So I do appreciate Belmont Watches for being able to supply this and lend this piece in so that I could share it with you guys. So some of you guys who might have seen it around on Instagram can find out what kind of all of the fuss is about. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. All right, shout out Belmont Watches. They're awesome guys. They're local in San Diego, and they curate some really, really cool stuff, to include this particular timepiece, and I'm blown away by it. So this, in terms of the specs, is a 38.6 millimeter in diameter, and then it is only 8.7 millimeters thick, or should I say thin, and then it's 46.3 millimeters lug to lug. It's made out of Supra 316L stainless steel. So this brand is really about sourcing things locally, doing things in-house, and it really shows when you get into the very, very fine details. So before I get into more words, let's just take a look and just breathe some of this in here, guys. Look at the super fine, whew, look at the level of brushing on that. The high polished bevel, super sharp transition. Look at the bezel there, how it has that concave contour to it, so that high polish stays high polished, which is really, really nice, because honestly, if you hit your finger to it or something like that, it's you would have to get in there to really smudge it around or scratch it, worst case scenario. So very, very nice. This thing just plays so thin. I mean, this strap itself is really, really nice, but it just, God, goodness, look at that, guys. That is just a super thin, really well executed. Look at the black, how inky and deep and dark this dial is. I mean, it's pretty mind-blowing. The sharpness of the dial, everything just to such a high standard, especially in a space where you're thinking, oh, okay, field watches, very simple, very rudimentary in terms of the execution. It's something a lot of folks can just kind of dial in because they're very simple. But so to see something like this where they just take it to another level, it's exciting, and it's one of those things that is it's just kind of that minimalist aesthetic. It can still be premium, but be minimalist. It doesn't, and then it can all, it doesn't have to be over the top. You don't need all the bells and whistles. But when you have every aspect of this timepiece executed to such a high level, it really takes everything and it just puts it in a higher space. And I mean, yeah, it's a basic dial. Looks similar to kind of a California dial, of course, but without the Roman numerals. You do have that familiar kind of train track outer minutes counter, but it all comes together. It's all very, very handsome and very highly executed. So let's get back into some more information on this piece. The case back is solid. Not much to see back there. It has a little bit of engraving on it, but I won't focus too much on that because this is a limited model, so it's 1 of 50. And then not number one, it's just 1 of the 50 that were made. And this thing is just sweet, man. The dial itself is actually hand polished, and it has such a beautiful glossy finish. I mean, you can go online and find out more, but I mean, if you know what goes into a hand finished, hand polished dial, I mean, it's pretty wild. And again, it's that black licorice color palette, and then they also do have even a very specific Scandi Noir type form in terms of the numerals and everything, the typeface that's being used. I mean, really down into every little detail. You get that, of course, beautiful silver paint for the railroad minutes track. You have Superluminova that's been painted in. You also get the date at 3 o'clock with a color matched wheel. And oh, of course, the minutes hand is kind of covering that. But even look at the way that the dial terminates around that window. It's just, oh my goodness, look at that. See how wet that looks? And that is all due to that hand finish, that high hand polish, that glossy black licorice aesthetic. It's really pretty mind-blowing. So in terms of the hands, steel hands, Superluminova, matte finished, of course, with some rhodium there. And then you also do get a steel seconds hand with the traditional lollipop design that also has some Superluminova on it there, so you can still make sure that the watch is running even in darkness. The water resistance on here, although it's not a screw down crown, it is a very nicely executed crown. Not signed, but I mean, it kind of fits the aesthetic. The movement inside is, geez, did we skip that? It's the Swiss Automatic Soprod A10, and I know there's kind of a mixed feeling around that. This type of movement's been in very expensive watches, ranging 3,000 and up from the likes of Zinn, but it's also been in cheaper watches like inside Steinhardt's, under $1,000. So these type of movements, I'd say the Sopra, they don't necessarily get the same level of prestige or appreciation, but in terms of the technology, the fit and finish, I mean, they're very solid movements, and there's a reason why a lot of brands choose them, especially when it comes to kind of ETA and their availability, and then the rising costs, on things like Solitas. So the beauty about the Soprod A10, which a lot of people don't necessarily know about, is that it's something that was, originally an intellectual property based off of a Seiko movement in their 4L, which is now, I think in its latest iteration, is the 6L. So it's an outstanding movement. Now that is actually in quite expensive watches from Seiko as well. So this is not a movement to be slept on. Look how thin it gets it. You can also get a similar movement in other expensive watches of kind of this creed and class. When you look at something like the automatic Weiss Field Watch. Those are outstanding. They use a similar movement, same type of, level of care and whatnot. But those, of course, are there's a lot that happens within the U.S. because that's a U.S. brand. This is, a brand out of Helsinki, and they've somehow found their way into so much attention and hype, and I can see why. This is just a super impressive timepiece, and I'm really glad that I was able to get hands on with it. So now I kind of know what the fuss is about. It has 20 millimeter lugs. This leather is black, and it's made of Nordic elk leather. And then it does have an 18 millimeter taper that comes down here to this beautifully, look at that, fully milled buckle. Just brushed to absolutely luxury level. They're very handsome, very well milled. I mean, this thing is just very, very sharp, and I'm here for it, guys. So with that said, let's get this piece on wrist and see how it wears. All right, guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this thing is just immaculate. Look how flat it wears. This, I mean, the strap is super nice. The buckle, very nice. It's, of course, on my larger wrist, I'm down to the last, looks like 3 holes there. But I have to say, I'm absolutely impressed. And because this watch is so thin and lays so flat, it does give it a bit more visual punch in terms of the layout. When you see you open my hand here, definitely doesn't appear to be oversized or undersized. I think it's one of those ones that kind of is right where it needs to be, right there at that little 38.6 millimeters in diameter. It just comes in really, really nice. Lays very flat. I dig it, guys. Wow. And I love that kind of idea that you can get a very high-end field watch. It's been something that's been very popularized within dive watches, of course. I mean, those are pretty much tool watches to the, by definition, and now are these kind of luxury status pieces thanks to the likes of brands like Rolex. But then you also look at aviation pieces like from IWC, and now those have just become very luxurious in terms of, again, simple design, just executed to extremely high levels. I love to see a brand do this with field watches, and they're not alone, and they're not the first, by any means, but wow. The level, again, I mean, just the dial. I mean, although let's say the dial aesthetic is quite simple, the execution, is really what takes this up a notch. The case, again, while a simple case silhouette, man, look at that level of finish on there. I'm just taken away by this one. This is really sweet. So it actually does have a loom. So let's go ahead and get into some loom shots, little light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. As you can see, very nice loom there. I mean, again, it's not a diver, it's a field watch. So it still comes out really great, does the job. But let's actually work in some low light transition. And some mixed lighting conditions, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. You could be spending most of your days indoors, walking underneath overhangs, underneath the shade of a tree, or maybe just spending time in your favorite automobile. So it is nice to see how these colorways, these textures, how everything renders in less than optimal lighting, to include maybe some harsh lighting here that'll typically expose any types of, defects. Oh my goodness, this dial is mind-blowing. Look how black that dial is. And that's a glossy dial. Holy smokes. I'm blown away. Look at the level of contrast that holds, and then that silver paint. Oh my. How is that dial just black like that, just so deep all the time? When you see me do this with other watches that might have a matte finish dial, let's say, or a sunburst dial, you see the way that, you know, those little textures will hold light. Let's say similar to this strap here. You see how the way that it's holding the light, and you're seeing the grain and whatnot. Now, when I get the light source over the dial, it's just the light just, I don't know where it goes. It just gets sucked into this black vacuum. I'm blown away, just because that means that that dial is so highly polished, so immaculately executed, that, I mean, really the only light you're going to see catch this black dial is right around the 3 o'clock date window, where there's the soft contour. Check that out. Right around the edges. Do you see how the light just dances right with that little area? And that's all you're going to get. Everything else, my goodness, wow. Very, very impressed. One day I would love to add something, you know, from this brand, from this collection into my long-term collection, because wow, this thing is sweet. I'm definitely really, really impressed with this one, and I totally understand why these cost so much. Now, a three-hand, you know, it's time plus date. Are you willing to spend, you know, upwards of $2,000 for a watch like this? I don't know. Am I? I'm not sure either. I mean, I guess I kind of have in certain ways, right? But I think with, you know, something like the limited edition King Seiko, you know, that was like 3 something. So, but that was more, you know, I think more obvious with what was expensive about it, in terms of what it was doing that was really kind of expensive. You can see the expense and the cost in those fine details, because they were a little, you know, kind of shouting in your face. Here, these fine details, they don't shout at you, man. They just sing a symphony to you. They're just not in your face at all. It's something to where the more you look, the more impressive this thing gets. And you don't always get that. I would say it's very uncommon for you to get that. I'd say under $3,000. Typically within that price range, the more you look at something, the more you're going to find things that kind of let you down versus impress you. I think at a glance there are other watches that might impress you more, but in terms of sit down with it, spend some time with it, you know, just hold its gaze. I don't know, you know, how much competition it really has from that perspective. It's very cool. So closing thoughts, guys, if I was to wrap this up, on the wrist, wears very thin without feeling at all fragile, which is great. Definitely very IWC-like in terms of luxury, grade, fit, and finish applied to a very serious tool watch formula. And then in terms of model variants, there's various releases, you know, in diverse colorways. Definitely check their site for availability. But if you want this particular model, definitely follow the link inside of the description so you can check out Belmont Watch and order through them. Again, these guys are great. Have had really wonderful interactions with them, local San Diego guys, but they're able to pretty much ship anywhere. So feel free to reach out, tell them you saw the video, etc. And then in terms of comparable models, you know, I'd say this in terms of like the mainstream that you might know or might be aware of. I'd say, you know, the US made Weiss watch, in terms of kind of that elevated pricing, but for, you know, it's an exchange for that higher level of in-house handwork production that's involved. So I did, you know, I have met Cameron Weiss, and I do also want one of those watches. They're awesome as well. and you know, very similar in terms of, hey, these kind of come out, they're very limited, and whatnot. But you know, that would be another option in terms of cross shopping that I've seen these, and I've personally kind of cross shopped against. Which one will end up in my collection, I don't know, because they're just both extremely impressive, for, you know, pretty similar reasons. So guys, on the bottom line here, I don't think of this really as an expensive Hamilton khaki, which some of you are probably like, oh, I can get a Hamilton khaki for like $400, and you know, and yes, you absolutely can. I'd say it's definitely more comparable to something like if you were to get an IWC or a Nomos in terms of that kind of quality of execution, and then within just a really well developed theme. You know, that's would be probably the closer comparable, and in those cases this would actually be a great affordable alternative, you know, to something like an IWC or Nomos. And that's just how impressive, you know, this particular piece, and I'm sure the rest of them are to that similar high level. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do hit like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.